They say humiliation doesn't leave bruises, but that day, standing in front of 30 uniformed officers, I felt every word like a strike to the ribs. Rear Admiral Rourke didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His smile carried enough disdain. Some pilots chase glory, he said, glancing at me without truly looking. Others chase sympathy. Let's hope Lieutenant Commander Cross has finally chosen the sky over excuses. A few muted chuckles followed. No one met my eyes. I stood at attention, hands steady, heart quiet. In my breast pocket, folded so many times the creases had turned white, was the document the Navy issued 7 years ago. Certificate of death, name Aaron Cross, cause Kia, killed in action. The room moved on without me. That's the thing about being erased. The world keeps turning. What none of them knew was simple. This was not the first time they had buried me, but it would be the last time I let them write my ending. I won't pretend this story is polished. It is not a tale of medals or parades. It's about silence. The kind that follows you home long after the war. The kind that convinces the world you never existed. If you've ever been forgotten while you were still breathing, if you've ever had to prove you were alive, stay with me. I'm not here to ask for sympathy. I'm here because someone has to speak for those who can't. Before we begin, I'd ask just one thing. If you believe every soldier, every Marine, every quiet soul who served deserves to be remembered, consider supporting this channel. A like, a subscription, it keeps these stories alive. Now listen carefully. My name is Aaron Cross, and officially I am dead. They say you never forget the smell of steel. Most people think it's blood or fire that haunts a battlefield, but the truth arrives much earlier. It's the cold tang of metal, sharpened by salt and machine oil, warning you that war remembers your name even when people don't. That was the first thing waiting for me as my boots touched the deck of the USS Roosevelt. Not a greeting, not a face, just steel breathing under my feet, deciding I did not belong. It wasn't my first time boarding a carrier, but it was the first time I stepped on one as someone officially deceased. On paper, I had no heartbeat. My orders were valid, my clearance approved, but the system recognized paperwork, not ghosts. The young seaman checking ID looked at mine too long. He glanced at my face, searching for something he couldn't place. A rumor, a memory, a story told in whispers. He didn't speak, he just stepped aside. Inside. The ship moved the way living things do, boots against metal, distant commands swallowed by bulkheads, engines humming like a heartbeat buried in steel. But as I walked, conversations thinned, not silence, something worse. That subtle recoil reserved for bad omens. No one knew who I was, but already some of them had decided what I wasn't. One of them, I found my berth on the lower deck. 3 racks stacked tight, no privacy but a thin curtain. Standard issue. Except for one detail. A folded slip of paper was wedged under my mattress. My last name, Cross, no rank, no welcome, just a warning left by someone who wasn't sure I was real. I didn't remove it. There's a cruelty in silence few understand. Words can strike, but silence can unmake you. It forces you to question whether your boots leave prints, whether your presence carries weight, whether you are truly living or just passing through the places where the living reside. I unpacked nothing. I only placed one strip of cloth at the back of my locker, the corner of a folded flag, not mine, the one they once gave my mother. I wasn't there to see it. I didn't need to. I could imagine the officers at her door, the rehearsed condolences, the moment she reached for proof that her daughter was gone. I could picture her fingers grazing that triangle of grief, whether she cried or remained perfectly still. Some wars don't end, they relocate. A door slammed in the passageway. Voices approached. 2 sailors passed outside my rack. One whispered, not quietly enough, "That's her, the one from the story." They didn't know my name, they knew my myth. There are no secrets on a ship, only versions. I stepped out. They averted their eyes instantly, heads tilted toward overhead pipes as if rivets suddenly fascinated them. I nodded once, no response. Fear is quieter than hate. Hate confronts, fear avoids. I moved on. My first daylight aboard Roosevelt met me on the flight deck. I walked out to the open sky like a diver breaching the surface. Rows of aircraft waited. Engines cold, shadows long across the non-skid. The Pacific wind cut through me, sharp and bracing. Instinct moved me toward an F/A-18, not mine. Mine had died in black fire years ago, but the shape, the stance was identical, a predator poised for judgment. I rested my hand on the wing, just one breath. My fingertips trembled. In combat, they teach you to quiet your hands. but no training silences a ghost that still grips you. A voice broke the wind. "Lieutenant Cross, ma'am." I turned. A young officer, Morrison, stood stiff, unsure whether to salute or retreat. "Commander Bishop requests your presence in the wardroom." I nodded. He hesitated. "They said you might be difficult to work with." I offered no reply. Rumor is immune to correction. Inside, the air narrowed. Roosevelt is a floating city built for discipline, not comfort. Every passageway calculates who belongs. I entered the wardroom knowing this was not courtesy. It was an assessment. 3 officers waited: Commander Bishop, Lieutenant Holt, quiet, sharp-eyed, and at the center, Rear Admiral Jonathan Rourke. He did not stand, did not nod. He studied me the way a man examines a malfunction, curious but already prepared to remove it. "Lieutenant Commander Cross," Bishop began, "we weren't expecting you until next week." "My paperwork advanced," I replied. Rourke took control without moving. "We have limited tolerance for disruptions. I trust your role will remain conventional." Conventional. I had once broken a pattern over Helmand against direct orders. Conventional was a word for pilots who returned when called. For pilots who never had their names carved on a flag, I answered, "I serve where assigned." His gaze lingered a second longer, then he dismissed me without a word. Outside, I reached the ladder well and paused. Not to rest, to recalibrate. On a ship like this, existence is not granted, it's carved. Earned through schedule, silence, competence. Belonging measured in who speaks your name unprompted. As I descended, a fragment of memory returned uninvited. My mother's hands on that flag. The room around her is motionless, a ritual of grief she was never meant to perform. I had watched her once through glass, alive but unready to knock. Some resurrections are too violent to force on the living. I stepped back into the passage. In the ready room corridor, 2 lieutenants whispered over schedules. Their words dropped mid-sentence as I passed. One word escaped before he saw me. "Coward," he choked it back too late. I did not confront him. Shame is louder than accusation. Pride screams. Coward kills quietly. The day moved forward. My name is absent from the rosters. No briefings, no assignments, not forgotten, unacknowledged. There is a difference. That evening I sat alone in the observation deck above the hangar bay. Through reinforced glass, the ocean stretched infinite and indifferent. A technician slept in the corner, headset still on. I watched the horizon until it blurred, not from tears, from the weight of questions unanswered too long. "What do you intend to do with your survival?" I had no answer, not yet, not until I returned to my rack and found the envelope waiting. No name, no seal, placed with surgical precision on my pillow. Inside, one phrase: Operation Midnight Torch, aircraft incident after action report. My burial, written without my body. The envelope waited on my pillow like a quiet order. Thin paper, no seal, no return to sender. I sat on the edge of the rack and slid a finger beneath the fold. Inside, I found a single report, creased as if it had already lived in a pocket for years. Operation Midnight Torch, aircraft incident after action. The words were clean, the meaning was not. Deviation from assigned profile, probable abandonment under stress. Each line stacked into a neat box that could hold 6 names without leaving a bloodstain. I read it again with slower eyes. The language did what it was designed to do. It separated choice from context, breath from heat, a pilot from a battlefield she could not touch. Visual observation limited, radio contact degraded, conduct inconsistent with expectations. The sentences marched in formation. And at the end of their parade, I was dead, and 6 men were gone for reasons that made the ship sleep. I folded the report and pressed the edge until the paper whispered. The sound took me back to a canopy rattling under heat, to an engine that coughed a warning, to the ground net begging for a sky that would not leave. Memory rose, fast and unsummoned. Specter One, how copy? I swallowed hard and let the voice fade. Not here. Not with steel at my back and a deck full of eyes that had learned to look away. I walked. The passage outside was narrow and bright, the air cool with recycled resolve. A petty officer moved aside without being asked, gaze fixed on a bolt head near my shoulder. I did not blame him. Ships teach a kind of politeness that has nothing to do with kindness. It is the politeness of not touching a story that could stain your hands. The ready room sat quiet as a chapel when no one is praying, screens aglow, chairs tucked. I laid the report on the table and lined it with the edge of the clipboard as if straight lines could force truth to stand at attention. The overhead hummed. Somewhere above us a deck crew shouted, voices cut by wind. The ship kept breathing. I had to decide whether I would. Footsteps paused at the hatch. Lieutenant Holt stepped inside and closed the door with care. She had the posture of someone who learned to borrow space rather than take it. Her eyes found the report before they found me. "That is not for general circulation," she said. "It was in my rack," I said. She did not touch the paper. She moved close enough to see the paragraph that mattered and stopped. "There are versions of that file," she said, voice even. "The official one is thin. Another has a paragraph that changes the temperature in the room. People act like paper is the truth. Paper is a choice. What do they say about me when they think I cannot hear them?" I asked. Holt took a breath that belonged to someone older. "There is a story that you climbed when you should have dived. There is a story that you turned back when ordered to remain. There is also a story that you came back when the math said you would not live." She met my eyes. "Most people pick the story that lets them finish their shift. Which one do you believe?" I asked. She did not answer with words. Her silence was not empty. It was a map with landmarks I would have to learn. Then she nodded toward the report. "Be careful what you carry," she said. "Some things change the way you walk." She left as quietly as she came. I watched the door after it closed. As if the steel might admit it had heard everything. The report waited on the table, patient as a wound. I slid it into my pocket and stood. Decision is a kind of oxygen. I had just enough to make it to the ladder well. On the catwalk, the wind hit hard and honest. Jets sat in rows like sleeping predators. I walked to the bow where the horizon cut clean and put my hands on the rail. The ocean did its work. It did not care who lived upon it or what stories were told in rooms where men avoided mirrors. I breathed until the air stopped burning. Boots stopped beside me. I did not need to turn to know the scent of crisp paper and cold authority. Admiral Rourke stood with his hands behind his back, eyes on the line where gray met gray. "In my experience," he said, "there are pilots who keep to their lanes and pilots who create their own. This ship functions when people keep to their lanes. In my experience," I said, "there are nights when lanes disappear." He turned his head a degree enough to register existence, not enough to grant it. "Obedience," he said, "is not a suggestion. It is the way a carrier avoids funerals." The report pressed a square against my chest. "I can be what the mission requires," I said. He nodded once and left the wind to finish the lecture. I watched him go. Power rarely hurries. It trusts gravity to do its work. Back below, the ship tightened. Doors seemed to swing on slower hinges. Faces shifted a fraction when I passed. The envelope had not arrived by accident. Someone wanted the dead to whisper. Someone else wanted me to drown in paper. At 2100, a slip of paper waited where my pillow should have been. No greeting, no name. "Ready room 2200, come alone." I checked the clock. 30 minutes to decide what kind of officer I would be this time. I went. The ready room lamp cast a cone of yellow that turned the rest of the space into a quiet sea. Holt sat with her hands folded. Eyes set on a spot on the table as if listening to something that lived under the metal. She looked up as I approached and pushed a thin folder toward me. Inside, I found schedules and maintenance logs that made no effort to hide their age. At the back, a comms extract, grainy and stained like it had been copied in grease and smoke. Specter One, fuel state. Specter One, say status. Specter One, abort. Specter One, acknowledge abort. Then a line of static. Then a voice I knew the way you know a scar in the dark. "Tell them she did not leave us." The words struck bone. They did not absolve. They did not accuse. They refused to let the lie stand alone. "Where did you get this?" I asked. Holt shook her head. "I do not have that answer. Someone hears the same current you do and chose to send a ripple. Be careful where you swim. This ship has undertows." "Why help me?" I asked. "Because I have read more names than I should have at my age." She said, "Because quiet is a luxury built on bodies. Because I do not want to read your name again." She stood and left me with the sound of a dying man and the hum of machines that believed they were innocent. I did not move until the clock marked the next hour. Then I slid the extract into my pocket with the report and walked toward the only door that felt like it led somewhere true. The corridor outside the chapel carried warm air that smelled faintly of wax. I stopped there and let the heat wrap my fingers. Ships know where prayers live even when no one speaks them. The door remained closed. I did not go in. I had nothing to trade for forgiveness and no taste for absolution. Past the chapel, an unmarked storage compartment leaned into the corner as if trying to disappear. When Holt had brushed by me earlier, she had let a single sentence fall like a breadcrumb. "Broken things go aft of the chapel." if something was hidden. It would be hidden there. The hatch creaked, a small sound swallowed by the ship. Inside was the archaeology of a long deployment, cracked headsets, bent chair legs. Manuals that had never turned anyone into a better pilot. I knelt by a metal cabinet and tugged a drawer that stuck like a memory. Behind a stack of dead batteries sat a small recorder with a peeling label and a gouge across the housing. I held it to the light. The battery was gone. The weight was not. A sound behind me shifted the air. I turned slow. Chief Warrant Officer Alvarez stood in the doorway, face carved by years and flights I would never log. For a long moment, he did not speak. Then he stepped inside, eyes on the recorder. "You are not supposed to be," he said, then stopped, as if the sentence had forgotten its own end. He nodded at the device. "That does not exist." I stood. "Neither do I, Chief." He looked at my face the way men look at photographs they are not sure they should keep. "We recovered pieces," he said. "We were told the rest. We made ourselves believe it until it stopped waking us at night." "Did I leave them?" I asked. His jaw tightened like a fist. "Do not ask me that in a room without windows." I held his gaze. "I will ask until the answer holds." He looked at the recorder, at my hands, at the floor. "Command will not save you," he said. "Truth will not save you either." He left. I set the recorder back down and waited until his steps faded. Then I slid it into my pocket. Some weights you carry because setting them down would be worse. On my way to berthing, a supply clerk rounded a corner with a stack of forms that reached his chin. The top pages slid and scattered at my boots. I knelt and gathered them. He reached for the last sheet and our fingers touched. He flinched like he had brushed a live wire. "Have a good night, Ma," he said, voice thin. I handed him the paper and kept walking. In the head, I stared at the mirror until my face sharpened back into mine. Short hair. Eyes older than the bones that held them. I tapped 2 fingers to my sternum and felt the steady drum of a heart that refused orders it did not trust. That would have to be enough. I lay in the rack without closing the curtain and held the recorder with both hands like it was a compass that had not yet chosen north. The ship breathed through ducts and pipes, a giant animal asleep but not resting. I wanted to call my mother. I wanted to say, "I am here and not a shape on your mantle." But I had given her a ritual. To take it back would be to insist she grieve all over again while I watched. I left the phone where it was. Sleep did not come. Memory did. A ridge line lit by tracer fire. A flare like a red planet dragged across black. A voice near my ear that belonged to a man who had already said goodbye to himself. "If you live, do not let them erase us." I had signed the paper that let them try. Tonight I had the tool that might make them fail. Morning arrived the way it always does on a carrier. Loud, immediate, unapologetic. I dressed and stepped into the passage as Holt approached from the far end. She was not waiting for me. She was passing through at the exact second the ship put us in the same frame. "Systems brief in 10, she said. Then she cut her eyes left to a junction nobody uses unless they do not want to be seen. "Do not go alone." We ended up in the back of the brief, standing like shadows. Commander Bishop spoke weather and alert posture with the rhythm of a man who has practiced the spell that keeps chaos just outside the door. Rourke entered halfway through and the room adjusted without moving. He did not look at me. He did not need to. Pressure communicates without words. After the brief, he stepped toward me with the calm of a man who has never had to raise his voice. "You will confine yourself to present duties," he said. "You will not retrieve or review legacy material without written authorization. You will not make yourself the subject." "I understand the mission," I said. He held me in a stare that tried to teach me my place. Then he walked away. The lesson did not take. At the ladder, Holt brushed my sleeve with an accident that was not an accident. "There is a maintenance bay with a terminal that reads old formats," she said without moving her mouth. "Langley stands watch. He is young enough to believe in things." The bay smelled like solder and dust. Petty Officer Langley sat behind a monitor with a stack of tech orders and a face that had not yet learned to hide belief. I placed the recorder on the table and let my rank do the work my words could not. "Integrity check," I said. He hesitated, then nodded. He found a battery that still remembered how to live in a cable older than both of us. The screen flashed, went black, then unfroze into a directory with 4 files. No names, only time stamps. "Open the first," I said. Grain and flicker. Heat signatures on desert black. A ridge trembling under small arms fire. The frame shook like a hand. Voices bled through static. Echo 2 taking fire. Need eyes, need the sky. Another voice answered, calm over noise, my own. Specter copies hold smoke, mark target. Langley breathed the way men do when they try not to. He tapped to the second file. Audio only, a storm of static carrying a heartbeat. Specter fuel critical, abort negative, men on, abort now. Then a pause, then the line that did not fit inside the report. Tell them she did not leave us. The third file refused to open. The fourth asked for a string I did not know. Langley looked at me like a kid who wanted permission to keep faith. "Ma'am, is this from Helmand?" I said, "Return to your duties." He stood, nodded, and stepped back to the far table where he stared at tools as if they might absolve him. I ejected the cable and felt the recorder settle into my pocket like a second spine. When I turned, Rourke stood in the hatch. He had the stillness of a threat that believes it is mercy. "Report to my quarters at 1800, he said. "Do not be late." For what? I asked. "Clarity," he said, and left. The word hung in the air long after he did. I walked the long route back to my locker to make sure it heard me too. Along the way, crew drifted past like current. Some looked away on purpose. One or two held their gaze a fraction longer than regulation allows. People sense a storm before they feel the rain. At my locker, I held the recorder and the report side by side. One spoke in neat lines that could be notarized. One coughed sand and blood and a last sentence that makes a man larger than his death. I slid them into my pocket together. They were heavier that way. That was the point. The ship shuddered as a jet took the wire overhead. Steel sang, lights flickered and held. I placed my palm flat on the locker door and felt the vibration climb my arm and settle behind my ribs. I had been erased on paper. I had helped them do it. Now the dead were asking me to write in ink they could not wash away. At 1755, I stood outside a door with no name on it. A sentry knocked once and stepped aside. Inside, Rourke stared out a window at an ocean that looked like a decision he was putting off. "You accessed restricted content," he said without turning. "You intend to challenge the record." I let the silence sit until it grew heavy enough to land. "I intend to name the men you left nameless," I said. He faced me. "Legacy is earned by discipline," he said, "not by noise. You chase ghosts. We keep ships afloat." I held his eyes. "Then your ships float on the backs of ghosts," I said. "We owe them weight." He studied me like a problem to be filed, not solved. 72 hours, he said, "then you comply or you leave." He did not dismiss me. I dismissed myself. Outside, the corridor felt colder by a degree no gauge would register. I walked it anyway. Holt waited at the T, hands at her sides, eyes unreadable. "You are going to do it," she said. "Yes." "It will not end with applause," she said. "Good. Applause would make it smaller." She nodded. Then she said something that tasted like a vow. "Say their names when you speak." "I will," I said. I palmed the recorder, felt the hard edge of the report, and kept walking. Somewhere forward, chains clanked and a deck crew shouted and a jet turned toward the sky. Somewhere aft, a door to a chapel breathed warm air into a cold corridor. Between those two places, a ghost chose to live. The records room lay deep in the ship, buried beyond the living heartbeat of routine. I walked through corridors where lights flickered like tired eyes, past compartments no one lingered in unless they had orders. It was the kind of hallway sailors avoided without knowing why. Some spaces feel haunted even when the ghosts are still breathing. I reached the steel door marked Archive, authorized personnel only. I pushed it open. I had already been marked unauthorized by life itself. Inside, rows of gray cabinets stood like silent witnesses, tall and numbered, holding stories sealed in paper instead of stone. The hum of ventilation echoed through the stillness, as steady as a heartbeat that did not belong to any living soul. I wasn't here seeking redemption. I wasn't hoping to be cleared. I came to see what they wrote in place of my name. I found the drawer labeled Midnight Torch. My hand hovered for a breath. Paper can cut deeper than shrapnel. I pulled it open. Folders flared outward like unsheathed blades. One of them carried my name. Cross Aaron L. Status Kia. Cause pilot deviation. Contributing factor. Probable abandonment under hostile fire. They wrote it in past tense, sealing me in a narrative I was never allowed to contest. I read every line. Precise. Clinical. Void of life. Communications lost. Abort order ignored. Aircraft departed area. They never mentioned the voice begging me to stay overhead. They never mentioned the hit that severed hydraulics. They never mentioned the landing that saved 2 men still breathing behind me. Records don't lie, they choose. They remove context so that judgment fits inside a single sentence. The door opened behind me. I knew the footsteps before I turned. Heavy gait slowed by an old injury. Chief Warrant Officer Kenneth Alvarez. He had once flown under my cover in 3 combat rotations. A man who had trusted my voice when tracers split the sky. He stopped halfway into the room and stared like he was facing a ghost. "You're not real," he said. Those were his first words. I faced him, real enough to read my own obituary. He stepped forward, then froze, as if crossing another step might shatter something neither of us could repair. "We recovered fragments," he murmured. "Seat harness. Helmet shards. They told us it was over. They said nothing was left to send home." I stayed silent. Some truths can only be acknowledged without sound. He looked at the folder in my hand. His expression hardened. "Why come back? Why open this? To see what story survived me." He shook his head. "You died, Aaron. They buried you in ink. Stay there. There's no mercy for the resurrected." I asked him one question. Did I leave them? His jaw clenched. He looked at the floor. "Don't ask me that. Not here. Someone wrote that I ran. Maybe command needed it simple. Maybe someone had to carry the blame so the rest could sleep. Is that what you believe?" He looked up, pain cutting through anger. "I believe command doesn't care what is true, only what is useful." He turned to leave. At the door he paused. "Truth costs more than lies. It won't free you. It will hunt you." Then he was gone. I sat alone with the cabinets. I laid the report flat on the metal table. The lines blurred, not from tears, but from the mind refusing to accept what eyes had read. Abandonment. That word does not accuse. It condemns. It forces survivors to question their memory. It teaches families to doubt what they once knew. A single word can kill legacy. I closed my eyes. The archive dissolved. Smoke returned. Fire along the canopy. A voice over the net. "Gunfire north. Can you see us?" I answered. "I see you. Hold smoke. I am coming down. I violated altitude. I violated orders. I did not violate duty. Records burn nuance first." The door opened again. Lieutenant Holt stepped into the room. She looked neither surprised nor lost. She approached the table, placed a plain envelope in front of me, and stepped back. "The mailroom found this," she said. "No name, no sender, no claim." I opened it. A memory chip, no label, no explanation. Lighter than air, heavier than bone. "You know what it means to possess this," she warned. "They call it tampering, breach of chain. They call it mutiny." "Why bring it?" "Because someone has to." She turned to leave. "Holt," I said. She paused. "If I go down this path, it won't end with rank. Nothing worth finishing ever does." She left me alone with the chip and the weight of a choice I hadn't fully made. That night, I didn't return to my rack. Bunks shrink the mind. I climbed instead to the flight deck. The sky stretched endless, the sea unbroken. A carrier at night feels like a nation holding its breath. Out there, under open air, I could remember without choking. I thought of Iowa. A white farmhouse with a porch light that stayed on long after my flag came home. My mother folding that flag every Sunday as if straightening its creases could hold me in place. I had stood outside her door once. Alive, I couldn't knock. To resurrect myself would be to kill her grief a second time. Some resurrections are too cruel to ask of the living. I stayed until the wind cut bone. Below deck, engines rumbled like a giant muscle turning in sleep. When I returned inside, the ship felt smaller, more watchful. Secrets are never silent. They breathed through steel. In the passage near berthing, Alvarez stood waiting, arms crossed, face drawn in shadow. He didn't look at me. "You think you're chasing justice," he said. "I seek truth." He shook his head. "Truth isn't what kills us, it's what follows. Are you ready for that?" I didn't answer. Silence was agreement. He turned his eyes on me then, bleak and bare. "I carried your name once. Don't make me carry your ghost again." He walked away. I stood alone. The chip in my pocket pulsed like a second heartbeat. I didn't know if it held absolution or damnation. I only knew one thing with certainty. They buried me on paper, but I remember every breath of that night. Some files aren't forgotten. They are buried alive, and someone on this ship expects me to dig. I held the chip long after Holt was gone. It was small, no larger than a dog tag, yet it carried the weight of a sealed coffin. Files like this do not drift. They are placed, left for someone reckless enough to open what others agreed to bury. I slid it into the inner pocket of my uniform, where it rested against my chest like a second heartbeat, faint but undeniable. I did not sleep. I spent the night alone in the ready room, lights dimmed, listening to the ship breathe through steel. Sleep is dangerous when truth begins to surface. It blurs memory, reshapes facts, and I needed both sharp. By dawn, I could hear the ship waking, boots in corridors, engines cycling, the rhythm of order resuming as if ghosts had no claim here. I waited until after morning muster. Move too early, someone notices. Wait too long, someone erases what was meant for me. The ship trusts machines. It distrusts those who remember. Combat systems maintenance was nearly empty. Fluorescent lights hummed over idle consoles. Petty Officer Langley, barely 22, looked up from a maintenance report he wasn't reading. "Ma'am, can I assist you?" I held up the chip. Digital integrity test, no extraction. He hesitated. Rumor precedes rank. He unlocked terminal access. I slid the chip in. The screen went black, then static, then one directory. Restricted footage, 4 files, no names. Langley shifted. His voice dropped. "Is that from Helmand?" "Return to duty, petty officer." He didn't move. "Some footage was pulled years ago. They said it wasn't usable. They said it didn't matter." "Who said that?" He swallowed. "Command." Then he retreated as if distance could keep him untouched. I opened the first file. Grainy fleur, desert night, heat signatures pinned against a wadi ridge, tracer fire stitching the sky. And there Collins, crouched low, waving a flare. Guiding me through fire. Audio crackled in. "Echo 2, taking fire we need. Spectre, do you copy?" My voice answered. "Spectre copies. Mark smoke. Stay low." Impact tore across the feed. A flash where my jet should have been, then void. I scrubbed forward. A frozen frame, a figure crawling, dragging another through dirt. Collins, alive, moving. The official record had written total loss, no survivors. My pulse was iron. I opened the second file. Audio. Intercepted radio. "Spectre, fuel is critical. Abort. Negative. Men on. Abort. Abort." Static swallowed the rest, but beneath it, buried like a dying breath. "Tell them she did not leave us." The same words Holt had shown me, not a rumor, evidence. The third file was corrupted, the fourth encrypted. I copied nothing. This was not ammunition, it was testimony. I ejected the chip and stared at it. Truth does not roar, it waits, for someone willing to be ruined by it. I slipped it back into my pocket. When I stepped into the passageway, Rourke was there. He stood with hands clasped behind his back, immovable as a bulkhead. Officers passing by straightened to invisible music. He dismissed them with a glance, then fixed his eyes on me. "Lieutenant Commander Cross, my name carried no honor, only scrutiny. You will report to my quarters at 1800. Do not be late. Purpose, sir." His gaze held mine, assessing liability. Clarity. He turned away. Clarity. In Rourke's command, that was not an invitation. It was a verdict being crafted. I went topside. The flight deck roared with aircraft checks, chains rattling, catapults screaming, but I wasn't watching the jets. I was watching faces. Some looked away, others braced as if expecting a storm they couldn't name. By late afternoon, I stood at my locker with the chip in hand. I had not played the final file. Fear is not loud. Fear is rational. It's a bargain. It tells you to survive at the cost of what you once swore to protect. I tucked it away. My mind drifted back to Iowa, the porch light, the window. My mother set 2 plates, one for herself, one untouched. I had stood at the edge of that porch once. Alive, unannounced, my hand lifted to knock. It never landed. Better a dead daughter than a broken one. That memory lingered like cold steel. At 17:55, I stood at Rourke's door. The sentry knocked. Enter. He stood facing the window, watching the sea. Without turning, he spoke. "You accessed restricted content." I stayed silent. "You intend to challenge the record." Silence again. He turned. "Why did you come back?" I answered with the only truth I had left, because I lived. He approached, slow and deliberate. "Legacy is not earned by survival. It is earned by silence. You chase ghosts. We write history. Decide which side you stand on." I asked one question. "In the Helmand report, did you read that someone survived?" He stilled. I continued. "Did you read that someone tried to clear me?" His jaw tightened. "You do not understand systems. I know systems that bled good men. I understand enough." His eyes hardened. "This ship has no room for crusades. Then it should not have delivered a ghost." He stepped back. "You have 72 hours. After that, compliance or departure." I saluted. He did not return it. In the corridor, I placed my hand against the bulkhead. The steel thrummed, alive and listening. The lie was not buried. It was breathing. Someone on the ship had recorded that night. Someone had refused to forget. I whispered, not as confession, but as oath. "They erased me from the record, but someone out there remembers, and I will find them." They said I died over Helmand. Maybe they were right. The woman who launched into that night never truly returned. My name was etched into a folded flag, carried to a farmhouse in Iowa, and whispered over an empty grave. But the sky remembers, the engines remember, and so do I. Helmand was never a mission, it was a crossing. I launched from the deck of the Roosevelt with a full payload and half a night of fuel. Call sign Specter One. There are pilots who fly by instruments, and those who fly by instinct. I had learned to do both, but that night forced me to choose. It was supposed to be routine overwatch. Search, confirm, return. No heroes, no martyrs, but the ground below was already burning long before the call came. The air at 20,000 feet was clear, serene, untouched by the desperation below. Echo 2, a Marine recon unit, was off-grid near a wadi west of the riverbed. Their last transmission fractured under artillery barrage. Command marked them as probable KIA. Procedure said to acknowledge and proceed, but procedures do not carry the weight of voices you once promised to protect. Control came in clean. Specter One, hold altitude, do not engage, I confirmed. I had protocol in my ear, but then beneath the static something bled through. Echo, taking fire, need eyes, I need the sky. Some voices sear themselves into the soul. I broke altitude. Specter One, you are out of scope. Return to pattern. They repeated it twice. They expected obedience. What they didn't know was that disobedience had already begun in the space between my ribs. Regulations don't cover men dying with your name on their last breath. I descended, 50 feet, 40, 30. Desert heat rose like a physical force. Below, tracer fire stitched through blackness. Infrared lit 6 signatures pressed against dying earth. I throttled back. They called it deviation. I called it gravity. I rolled left, lined up the ridge, armed the cannon. 20 mic against small arms. It wasn't rescue, it was retribution. The first burst blew open the hillside, scattering fire. Echo 2 moved, crawling, blood trailing behind shadow. One Marine signaled with a flare, red against black. I knew that posture before I knew his name. Collins, months earlier. He joked over mess that if I ever flew sky cover for him, he'd buy me a beer with his last breath. That night, he kept the promise. Spectre, if you see us, burn them. I did, but war doesn't barter. A flare arced from the orchard. Impact slammed into the right wing. Warnings flooded my headset. Hydraulic failure. Fire in Bay 2. I corrected the pitch. 1 minute of flight, maybe less. Ground demanded abort. I ignored them. One more pass. Collins hauled a wounded Marine through fire. No salute, just a tilt of his helmet. Finish it. I hit the last nest. Dust clouded the visor. Smoke choked the sky, then impact. A second strike. Violent, white, then silence. Canopy fractured. Sky, earth, no horizon. Next memory, static metal shearing. Voices muffled by sand and blood. I don't remember ejecting, only a hand gripping mine. Collins, his voice rasping through smoke. If you live, don't let them erase us. Don't let them write cowards on our graves. Then nothing. I woke in a medical tent. Burn dressings wrapped my arms. Oxygen mask tight. 2 officers stood outside the flap. They weren't doctors. One held a pen, the other held a form. KIA confirmation. They asked nothing. They told everything. Echo 2 lost. Specter 1 failed to return. Mission terminated. No deviation, no survivors, no witnesses. I took the pen. I signed my own death. Better dead than complicit. Better KIA than paraded as a lie. That night I was loaded onto a silent transport. No flag, no ceremony, no name, just cataloged, sealed, erased. I vanished. Years ground past like sand through steel gears. I drifted across bases without insignia. A test pilot, an instructor, a ghost in plain sight. I never spoke of Helmand because I made a promise. Because Collins' blood was still on my gloves, folded into a box I never opened again. But silence is a slow execution. With every year the lie grew. They labeled me deserter, traitor, coward. They did not know I was already dead. Roosevelt, the file, the chip. Voices, that carrier didn't summon me for justice. It summoned me to finish the burial. They didn't expect me to remember. They forgot what I am. I am Specter One. I do not vanish. That night, back in my quarters, I held the chip over the desk. No rank, no allies, only a dead name and a truth too heavy to remain buried. Collins' flare, his helmet, his breath. If you live, don't let us be erased. I slid the chip into the reader. Static, then flame, then his voice. They can write what they want. I will speak first. So listen, some of us died in the sky, some on paper, but none of us asked to be forgotten. I sat alone after the recording ended, the room closing around me like a sealed hull. Colin's voice still echoed in my skull, raw and unfinished. If you live, don't let them erase us. I had lived, but survival meant nothing if I allowed the lie to stand. For years I carried that sentence like shrapnel beneath the skin. I convinced myself silence was loyalty, disappearance was mercy, but mercy asks you to forget, justice forces you to remember. The recording device lay on the table. The ship groaned through the bulkheads, settling into another routine cycle. Reports filed, pilots briefed, engines warmed. Above this deck, they believed they were sailing through peace. They had no idea the dead walked among them. I pressed my palms against the steel, steadying my breath. I was no longer afraid of dying. I was afraid of dying unheard. I left my quarters with the chip secured against my chest. The corridor was quiet. Only the rhythm of distant boots moving without urgency. A boatswain's mate crossed my path, gaze lowering as he passed, unsure whether to salute a living officer or avoid a returned ghost. I didn't speak. Let them question what they see. Discomfort is the first step toward truth. The hangar deck roared with movement when I arrived. Chains clanged, headsets crackled. Aircraft taxied into position like beasts waiting to be unleashed. I stepped to the catwalk rail, staring across the Pacific's churn. 7 years since Helmand, but some battles do not age. They linger beneath the ribs, waiting to be named. Holt had not approached me since the chip. She was not an ally, she was a witness. The ship did not need loyalty, it needed someone willing to remember. A memory intruded, a tent, a form, a pen. The officer offered silence as mercy. This simplifies things. I nodded and signed my own death. Better to vanish than be decorous at a ceremony built on lies. But I had outlived that choice, and survival demanded a new task. Living is not a relief, it is an obligation. A voice cut through my thoughts. Lieutenant Commander. I turned. Bishop stood, helmet tucked beneath his arm. His tone was steady. Ma'am, you're scheduled for readiness at 09 tomorrow. I nodded. He hesitated. Quietly, he added, people talk. They say you're digging into things best left alone. I met his eyes, and what do you think? He didn't blink. I think some things shouldn't stay buried. But I also think this ship will bury whoever digs. He walked away. That was not a warning, it was a cost. That night I returned to the records room, the same gray cabinets, the same motionless air. Only now I carried proof. I laid two truths on the table, the written lie and the spoken memory. One called it abandonment, the other called it resistance. One of them would have to break. I closed my eyes. I did not hear Colin's words. I heard his breathing, ragged, alive. The reports wrote him out of breath. They buried him twice, first in body. Then in honor, they condemned me because it was easier than admitting we tried. I opened my eyes. I spread the official report flat. On the margin beside abandoned under fire, I wrote 2 words with my own pen. He lived. It was not enough, but it was a beginning. Footsteps entered. Holt. She studied the table. You opened it. I nodded, and now you carry it. I said nothing. She glanced at the cabinet. They will come for it. I answered. They already have. She drew a breath. There is a tribunal route, petition, review, but you'll need more than paper. You'll need witnesses. Alvarez, Colin's family, everyone left, names etched in memorials or buried under soil. You'll have to summon them, not from war, from denial. I asked why she stayed involved. She met my eyes, because someone should have asked what happened that night, and no one did. She left. The lights flickered to night mode. The room dimmed. I rose, carrying chips and reports. 2 halves of the same wound. In the passage, Alvarez appeared. We froze. He stared at the chip in my hand. You found it. I nodded. His shoulders sagged. You're going to open this up. Yes, he closed his eyes. There is no clearing, only revealing. Then he looked at me, voice burned to gravel. If you pull that thread, the dead won't be the only ones exposed. He walked into the dark. I returned to my rack, sat upright, back straight. I pulled out a blank page. I did not write a plea, not a defense, a record, my own. The first line cut through the silence. My name is Aaron L. Cross. I did not abandon Echo 2. I wrote until the words blurred, not from pain, from purpose. I folded the page, placed it beside the chip. They said I died over Helmand. Tomorrow I will correct them. Some men flee death. I waited for it. It never came. Now I know I was not meant to die. I was meant to speak. They did not expect me to live. But now that I do, I will not stay dead. They called it an inquiry, but I knew what it was. A burial with better lighting. No flags on the walls, no ceremonial uniforms, just a narrow room with a metal desk bolted to the floor and 3 officers seated in shadow. 1 chair waited for me, positioned like an open grave. This was not a court for truth. It was a room designed to contain disappearance. I entered without salute. None was offered. The door closed behind me with a hiss, final as a coffin lid. No counsel, no recorder, only eyes, sharpened and cold, waiting for me to plead my own erasure. Admiral Rourke sat at the center. His ribbons were absent, his hands folded. He studied me with the confidence of a man certain the verdict had already been written. To his left, a captain from JAG, fingers tapping a rhythm against his knee. To his right, an unfamiliar commander who would not lift his gaze from the folder before him, likely the same file that declared me dead. Rourke spoke first. You accessed restricted archival materials. His tone was not an accusation. It was a statement as blunt as a blade laid on steel. I did not answer. The JAG officer added, you removed classified property. Again, I remained still. Silence is not defiance. It is a mirror. They waited for excuses, trauma, instability. Anything they could catalog. I offered nothing. Finally, Rourke leaned forward. Do you wish to provide a statement, Lieutenant Commander Cross? He spoke my name like a courtesy he no longer believed necessary. I let the question hang until the air thinned, then I answered. I did not come here for defense. I came for the record. The JAG officer's hand froze. The commander looked up, uncertain. Rourke did not move. I reached into my jacket. They stiffened, bracing for outburst. But I placed only paper on the table, unfolded, creased by years. The flight log that buried me, the same one that condemned Echo 2, pilot deviated from profile, loss of radio discipline, probable abandonment under stress. I rotated the page so it faced them. Do you believe this? The JAG officer began. We are not here to. I cut him quietly. I asked if you believe it, not protocol. You, the commander's eyes faltered. Rourke remained stone. Belief is irrelevant. The record is the record. I held his gaze, then laid a second page beside the first. A comms extract, grease-stained, unofficial, a voice fractured through static. Tell them she did not leave us. The silence that followed was colder than the steel between us. They asked my purpose, so I told them. I did not return to clear my name. I returned so they would not be left without one. The commander spoke, barely audible. Them, who are they? I looked to the empty wall behind them where no memorial would ever hang. Collins, Reeves, Mathies, Adler, Navarro, Tate, Echo 2. I spoke their names, no rank, no eulogy, just names. 6 men erased in an operation that never existed on record. For the first time. Rourke looked away, somewhere no one else could follow, somewhere wind and fire still lived. I folded my hands. The record is incomplete. They did not flinch. The JAG gathered composure. Your conduct remains. I cut him again. I did not break the silence to win. I broke it so they would not die twice. The room held its breath. No pens moved. No verdict passed. This was judgment, not on me, on them, in the quiet they had chosen over the truth. Rourke rose slowly. As if it cost him bone, the others followed. He placed his hands on the table. No rules remained that fit what had just entered this room. You will receive official notice of findings, he said. His voice was stripped of rank. I stood. They did not dismiss me. I did not ask. I turned and walked out, leaving the pages behind. No one called my name. No one stopped me. They did not clear me. They did not condemn me. They did something heavier. They sat in silence. The corridor outside was empty, unchanged, but for the first time since Helmand, the weight I carried shifted, not gone, never gone, but no longer mine alone. Some will say that is not victory. They are right. It is not. It is a burden, and burden shared is the beginning of justice. Some wars end with explosions. Others end with a closed door and a truth no one can unhear. I walked on, not free, but no longer buried. They did not dismiss me. I dismissed myself. The corridor outside the inquiry room felt colder than before, narrow and airless, like a lung that refused to breathe. Behind me, the sealed door held the weight of men who had no verdict to deliver. No gavel struck, no words followed. That was the truth of such rooms. They did not release you. They held you until you chose to walk out carrying more than you brought in. I moved down the passage with the pace of someone returning from flight. Not victorious, not broken, certain. For years I asked what killed Echo 2. Today I understood. It was not a fire. It was silent. At a small porthole I stopped. The ocean shifted in gray currents beyond the glass. I placed my palm against the steel rim. For a moment memory rose unbidden, Collins lifting a wounded Marine, Adler laughing at some joke half remembered. Reeves cracking his knuckles before a night patrol. None of them had heard their own names in 7 years. Today they lived again, not redeemed, recorded. When I reached the ladder well, she was waiting. Lieutenant Holt stood with arms crossed, expression unreadable. She asked no questions. None were needed. The truth had entered the ship. She held my gaze. Did you say their names? I nodded. She inhaled, steadying something in her chest. Then softly, almost reverently, she said, "Then they exist again." We walked in silence. Around us, sailors moved through routine, eyes fixed forward, careful not to align with mine. Before they avoided me because I was a rumor. Now they avoided me because I was proof. Proof is heavier than ghosts. In the wardroom, I took a seat at an empty table. I did not touch the tray before me. I watched condensation slide down a metal cup. 2 junior officers entered. One turned away sharply, pretending to search for something he had not lost. The other halted, caught in hesitation, then offered the smallest nod. Not respect, recognition. Progress at sea is measured in inches. The intercom crackled. Drill call in 10, all pilots to readiness. My body stood before thought could follow. Muscle memory moves faster than grief. At the hatch, Chief Alvarez appeared. He did not speak at first. He only studied me with eyes that carried too many winters. I waited for judgment. Instead, he said, "I saw the report change." He stepped closer. "They took your name first, then they took theirs. Orders," he said, "just orders." I asked him what he believed. He swallowed hard, something shifting behind his jaw, then turned away. That was all. It was enough. Shame is not justice, but it is a beginning. On deck, the wind hit with the sting of jet fuel and salt. Crews moved in orchestrated chaos, chains clanging, helmets glinting beneath the hard sky. I stood at the catwalk's edge where I once stood as a ghost in borrowed rank. This time I was not watching the sea. I was waiting for something unnamed. Footsteps approached. Familiar, waited. I did not turn until he stopped beside me. Admiral Rourke, no stars, no medals, just a man stripped of decision. For a long time he said nothing. I let silence stand. At last he spoke. "They will not clear you." I answered I did not ask to be cleared. He nodded once, then added, "They will not punish you either. They cannot. You already died." I turned toward him. He looked out to sea. "You understand the cost, Cross. Most think the truth is owed. It is not, it is paid." He asked one question. Why return? 7 years buried. Why rise? I let the wind carry time between us, then answered. Because they asked me not to let them disappear. His eyes met mine, not an enemy. Equal. He offered a nod smaller than respect, heavier than apology. Then he left, not absolved, altered. The whistle blew, engines roared to life. I stepped back, letting the thunder fold over me. I did not belong to this ship. I belonged to every name stitched into memory. This was never about rank, it was about bearing witness. Below deck in my rack, the recorder waited. I sat on the edge, removed my gloves, placed them neatly beside me. My hands were steady, my breath even. Some truths demand ritual. Some evidence deserves ceremony. I pressed play, static, wind, a breath. Then his voice, "Tell them she did not leave us." The sound slipped beneath armor I had worn for years and broke something that needed breaking. I did not weep, I did not bow. I listened. I whispered back, "I know, and I will not let them forget." Later, I stepped into the passageway and rested my hand against the steel. The ship groaned like an old lung. Tomorrow there will be consequences, files, orders, threats. But tonight I had done what I returned to do. I had spoken the dead back into existence. Not for glory. Not for absolution, for the record. If you ever seek justice at sea, do not look for applause. Look for silence that refuses to sleep. I did not resurrect myself. I buried the silence. They offered me a medal before I left the ship. I did not take it. A citation, they called it, for courage, for sacrifice, for conduct becoming an officer. But courage had nothing to do with what happened, and sacrifice was not a choice I made. I had already died once. I was not interested in dying more nobly on paper, so I left the carrier without ceremony, without escort, only a duffel bag and the recorder in my pocket. No band played, no hands saluted. The deck crew stepped aside the way men do when something passes that cannot be named. I flew home as a passenger, strapped into a commercial seat among strangers who slept under thin blankets. I watched clouds drift beneath the wing and thought of how peaceful they looked from above. In war, clouds are covered. In peace, they are scenery. Somewhere over the Midwest, a flight attendant asked if I wanted water. I nodded, but never lifted the cup. My hands were already holding what I truly carried. 6 names, 1 truth, no rank. I landed in Iowa past midnight. The airport was almost empty. A janitor pushing a mop bucket paused when he saw me. Maybe it was the jacket, maybe it was my eyes. Some people recognize war even when it wears no uniform. He said nothing, just nodded once. I returned it. There are gestures that weigh more than words. I did not go home, not yet. I rented a car and drove on roads I had known all my life. Past cornfields carved to winter stubble, past silos standing like patient sentries. The closer I got, the slower I drove. The farmhouse appeared on the rise, dark windows, porch light off. 7 years of grief lived inside those walls. I killed the engine and sat in silence. The air outside was cold enough to cut. My hand touched the door handle. It did not move. I saw her through memory. My mother folded the flag she should never have been asked to hold, placing it beside a photograph she believed would never breathe again. She had already buried me with her own hands. To walk up those steps now would be to unbury both of us. I was not ready, neither was she, so I left the house untouched and drove until dawn. I stopped at a rest area overlooking an empty field. I closed my eyes and heard Collins again. If you live, don't let us be erased. I had fulfilled that, but a new question stood before me. How does a dead woman return to the living without killing them twice? 2 weeks later, the letter arrived. Naval Personnel Command, Arlington. They acknowledged my resignation from active combat duty. They offered reassignment. United States Naval Academy, Annapolis, instructor, ethics under fire. They gave it a title, Ghost Doctrine. I did not choose the name. Someone who had read the file did. I packed again. Fewer things this time. A uniform, a pair of boots, a worn dog tag that was not mine. Collins. He had no family but a sister somewhere in Ohio. The tag was returned to command after Helmand. Unclaimed, filed away. Labeled KIA, lost in terrain, lost in record, but I carried his voice. It had a place now. Annapolis in winter is a quiet kind of honest, snow on brick, cadets in formation, bells carrying across cold air like truths meant to be heard from a distance. The commandant met me at the gate. He did not ask about Helmand. He did not mention sealed rooms or reports. He only said, your class begins in March. My quarters overlooked the Severn River. At dawn, I watched ice move in slow lines. Ships passed without fanfare. Their wakes barely trembled. Some mornings I stood at the window, unsure if I was preparing to teach or preparing to testify all over again. At the desk, I built lessons, not tactics, not strategy. Questions. What do you owe the dead? What do you owe those who return? What do you owe yourself? The night before I taught, I could not sleep. I unrolled the documents from the carrier. The false report, the comms extract, the note, tell them she did not leave us. I traced the ink with one finger, not to recall, to confirm. I had not come back for absolution. I came back because forgetting is another kind of violence. Morning came slowly and gray. I dressed in service khakis with no medals. Medals tell stories medals cannot prove. In my hand, I carried the dog tag, Collins' name worn thin by time. I reached the lecture hall 10 minutes early. Empty rows, one podium. On the board, someone had written "Discipline wins wars." I erased it. Cadets entered quietly, young faces, clean ambition, not one approached. They sat with notebooks ready, waiting for doctrine. I spoke without rank. Death is not failure. Forgetting is. Pens froze, breath held. You will wear uniforms built on the lives of those who came before you. Some of those lives were not recorded. Some were rewritten. Some were erased. History is not the truth. It is a decision. I placed Collins' tag on the podium. It did not ring. It landed like something still alive. This is not mine. Belonged to a Marine named Collins. No school will teach his name. No memorial will etch his story. But he kept a promise to his last breath. That is leadership. That is the cost. A cadet leaned forward. Ma'am, what happened to him? I asked. Does it matter? He hesitated, then whispered, yes. Good, I said. Remember that. When truth becomes uncomfortable, that is when it matters most. I dismissed them without dismissal. They left in silence, but not ignorance, when they were gone. I stood alone, and for the first time in 7 years, I felt grounded, not steel, earth. That evening I drove north, toward the house I had once abandoned at the edge of grief. The porch light was on. I climbed the steps, knocked once. The door opened. My mother stood there, hair silver, eyes intact. She looked at me. No shock, no tears, just a breath she had held for too long. She said, I knew you weren't done yet. She stepped aside. I entered. The house smelled of cedar and coffee. The folded flag still rested on the mantel. I placed the dog tag beside it, not to replace, to join, 2 stones on the same grave. We did not embrace, we did not speak. Some reunions are too sacred for words. We sat at the table until darkness settled. 2 women, one returned, one waited, both alive. Later, in the quiet of my old room, I opened a blank page and wrote the only doctrine I still believed. The dead do not ask to be avenged. They asked to be remembered. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, no return address. Just my name, written in a hand I did not recognize. It had been forwarded twice, redirected from the carrier, then from Annapolis, as if it had spent years chasing a ghost it refused to let rest. I turned it over, feeling the weight of paper that had waited too long to be read. The seal was worn, the edges yellowed, as if time had tried to erase it but failed. Inside, one sheet, folded in thirds, one name at the bottom. Collins, the words were written before Helmand, before the valley, before his last breath. It was not a farewell, it was a directive. If you're reading this, it means I didn't make it. And if you're alive, it means you did. So do one thing. Don't let them make us a footnote. We were here, make them say it. I let the letter fall to the desk. He had known, not the place, not the night, but the truth, that our names would not be carried by headlines or monuments. That our story would live or vanish depending on whether someone chose to remember. I touched the ink and whispered the answer I owed him. I will. In the weeks that followed, my lectures changed. More cadets filled the room. Some wore wings. Others carried infantry dreams. All came early and left silent. I never used slides. I never used ranks. I taught them in their absence, how history omits, how records choose, how silence kills. Each morning I wrote one line on the board. Death is not defeat. Silence is. One afternoon, a young woman stayed behind. She stared at the dog tag on my desk. She said my brother was lost in Kunar. They sent us nothing, just gone. I did not offer comfort. I offered the truth. Do you want facts? She shook her head. No, I want someone to say his name. That I could do. That all of us could do. Word traveled without noise. A file reopened in Norfolk. A line amended in Pendleton. A memorial quietly adjusted. The Navy issued no apology. It issued something louder. It added 6 names to a stone. Echo 2, no rank, no citation, just names. That is how the dead endure. In spring, the Academy held a dawn ceremony. No anthem, no speeches, a simple plaque on a wall of cold stone. The Ghost Project, 6 names beneath. No mention of mine. Good, I had never wanted to be seen, only to ensure they were no longer invisible. At the edge of the gathering stood Admiral Rourke. No uniform, hands behind his back. He removed his hat. He did not kneel. He only stood as a man stripped of command, facing men he had once commanded and failed. When he turned, his eyes met mine. No salute, a nod, a vow, then he was gone. Weeks later, I returned to Iowa. My mother sat on the porch shelling peas into a metal bowl. She did not rise. She simply looked at me with eyes that carried both the burial and the return. I sat beside her. We watched the horizon in silence. She asked, "Are you finished?" I shook my head. She nodded once. "Then you are home only to rest." We did not speak of flags or graves. We watched the sky, ordinary, unburdened. Back at Annapolis, I kept 2 chairs in my office, one for cadets, one for ghosts. Each night, I placed the dog tag on the empty seat, a roll call of one. Some noticed, none asked. They would understand in time. Leadership is not built on victories. It is built on witness. On the final day of term, a cadet approached. He stood rigid, but his voice was young. "Ma'am, do you think courage is doing what's right?" I considered it. "Courage," I said, "is doing what's true even when no one will ever know." He hesitated. "Will anyone know what you did?" I met his gaze. "No, but they will know what they did, and that is enough." That night I walked to the chapel. Empty pews, silent glass. I did not kneel. I did not pray. I set Collins' dog tag on the rail. I spoke aloud to the quiet. I was never meant to be remembered. I was meant to remember. When I stepped back outside, the air felt different, not lighter, just honest. The wind moved across the courtyard. Bells rang the hour. I did not look back. I walked forward, because some wars do not end. They are carried, and if you carry a name, speak it. If you survived a fire that others did not, live as proof they were here. That is Ghost Doctrine. That is all the doctrine I have left. I never asked to be remembered. I only asked that the ones I stood beside would not be erased. People talk about survival like it's a gift, but those of us who have worn the uniform know better. Survival is an assignment. The dead do not rest until someone speaks their name. That weight does not weaken us, it defines us. I carried their truth across sand, steel, sealed rooms, and quiet classrooms, not to clear my record, not to seek apology. Justice belongs to tribunals. Truth belongs to the living, and I am still here because the ones who died trusted me to carry it. That is why I stood. That is why I returned. That is why this story exists. Maybe you have never held a rifle. Maybe you have never folded a flag. That doesn't matter. If you have ever refused to let someone's name disappear, then you already know this war. In one way or another, we are all witnesses. I do not need you to remember me. I need you to remember them. Remember Collins. Remember Echo 2. Remember every quiet soldier who never marched in a parade but never once broke their promise. They live only when we speak them out loud. If my story has found you, if you believe no life should be buried in silence, stand with me now. Type one word in the comments, witness, not as applause, but as acknowledgement. Let the world see that we do not abandon our dead. And if you want to hear the stories the world tried to forget, subscribe to Military Revenge. Not for my name, for theirs, for every name still waiting in the dark, hoping someone will speak it back into light. I was never meant to be honored. I was meant to remember, and I do.